Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And welcome back. Today we had the Hungarian Grand Prix, and the grin on my face can already say 1,000 words. We're here to dive into our post-race discussion to talk about all the drama from lap 1 all the way through to lap 70 and beyond, as we've just discovered. So we're recording this at 9:20 on the Sunday. Just got home from work and quickly watched the race, and some breaking news has come out, but we'll talk about that later on in the podcast. But wow,
what a
race.
What a tease that was.
What a tease. Like the
just
news
got some
is breaking
news
right now.
We'll come back to that.
We'll
come back to the breaking news.
But by the time this episode goes out, it's not breaking news, but it's breaking news for us. The drama continues. Great. I cannot wait to dive into this. And I think there's no better way to start than just handing over to you, Alex. Take us through.
Let's keep things simple for the beginning, because this was a very multifaceted race, very unpredictable. Hungarian showing its absolute best. We got a little bit of weather excitement as well. But let's start where we normally begin, with qualifying, because there's definitely a few things to look at. How we had a fairly straightforward qualifying in many ways. It didn't really sort of preempt the chaos of Sunday at all, really. But it was a surprise to not see Russell through after Q1.
First time this year.
That's right. Yeah, he's had a fantastic record on Saturday, as we know. This is the first time he's not managed to make it through. At the time, I was thinking, it's hard to imagine, many, if any, positions really being made up on the track here. From P17, there would have to be a safety car. This is going to be a tough one for them. So that was my thinking at the time. We also had Q2 Sainz binned it out of the final corner, which caused a red flag. Again, a bit of a surprise in an unusual area for that to happen. I think he mentioned something to do with the wind. So there was some high crosswinds or something going on, so he victim of that. And then Q3, we had a little bit of drama where the Verstappen and Hamilton. I don't really want to call it a feud, because it's not a feud. They're racing drivers on a track racing each other. That's what they're supposed to be in conflict. That's the whole point. That's why they're there. They're there to win the same championship. They can't both win it. Obviously, there's going to be conflict. So we had a little bit of excitement there, though, where Mercedes came out top trumps and took their double front row. Took the front row lockout. That's the word I'm looking for. And it's their first one since Portugal, and only their second of the year. So Shane, what were your thoughts coming out of qualifying? Because we had Mercedes 1 and 2, we had Red Bull following behind, and it seemed like we were, it was 2020, it was 2019, Mercedes dominating, Hamilton pulling out 4/10 on everybody somehow.
I think the games played by Mercedes were fantastic. There were games. This is sporting. The track has certain characteristics where it doesn't really allow or doesn't really present many overtaking opportunities. And Mercedes knew if they got out ahead of the Red Bulls, they could just hold that ground and play the lap towards their hands. And they did exactly that. So I think it's clearly well within the rule books, and it's very well thought out. And it's exactly what Mercedes maybe needed to do to get ahead in qualifying to give them the best chance in the race. Now, Alex, I have a question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Please
Did you miss sprint qualifying this week?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, okay. I was kind of watching
I have no
thinking,
problem with the format. I like the format exactly as it is. It's not the format that's the problem.
Okay. But did you miss any some Friday drama? Did you miss the race, or what would have been the qualifying on the Friday and the sprint race on the Saturday? Did you think that the weekend needed more drama? Probably not, looking back on it, but at the time of watching the qualifying, did you think,
can't take any more drama? I understand what you mean, having that kind of those 3 full days of excitement. You get the qualifying race and another race. Personally, this is just based on my own kind of needs and interests. I rather like having that kind of slow build up to the Sunday. I sometimes catch little bits on a Friday. I don't often have time to catch it. I'm usually working around the time that the practice is going on. So I'll watch the highlights when I get home, and it's rather nice. Oh, there's a race coming. And then Saturday, if I got time in the afternoon, I might see if the qualifying is on. And then and then Sunday I'll definitely sit down and watch the race. So I kind of like that slow build. That works for me personally. Having to like watch another race on the Saturday, it then feels like there's more that I might miss out on.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
I don't know. I just like the build up to the Sunday race. That does it for me. That's just a purely personal kind of idiosyncratic thing, I guess.
Yeah, it is what it is. And that's pretty much all I've got for qualifying. Like you said, it was a Mercedes 1-2 with the usual grid behind them. It was almost like you said, 2020 or 2019 or any of the turbo hybrid era, to be fair. It could have been any year. The normal services had resumed on qualifying.
I think it was surprising as well that Hamilton was, maybe it wasn't surprising. I don't know. It was surprising that he was booed during his post-quali interview as well, because it seemed that people perhaps took issue with the fact that he had, like, obviously this gamesmanship that we talked about. It seems to me that the mistake is from Red Bull for allowing themselves to get sent out. They sent out Verstappen and Perez after Hamilton. Perez didn't even make the final lap. So clearly when it was like advantage Mercedes, you'd think they'd make sure that they got out in front of the Mercedes, so that couldn't happen, but they didn't do that. So that's the mistake that was made there, and Hamilton did what he obviously was going to do and has done before to make sure that he gains the advantage on qualifying. So that's going to happen, and Red Bull probably would have done the same thing. It was the other way around, because they're going to want to exploit that advantage. Why wouldn't you?
But one thing we can agree on is that booing is just so unnecessary and
ridiculous.
So rude.
It's pathetic.
Like, you often see it when I watch football games, more recently the Euros, and the England fans, I'll say, like, they're terrible sometimes because they're booing, they're hissing, and they're fighting after the football. But to hear any fans boo a sport, it's just not nice. I love to hear cheering and congratulations. Look at Monza. When any driver wins, the Tifosi come out and they're just applauding anyone because actually thinking back on it, I think they've booed before as well. Have they?
Yeah, don't know if the Tifosi. Well, firstly, they're not an amorphous group, are they? They're they're a collection of complicated individuals, I'm sure. But I don't think the Tifosi can necessarily be used as a banner example. But
nevertheless, it's just not very nice, is it?
It just comes down to the fact that principally, just from this particular situation, just focusing on this particular situation, it doesn't work on Hamilton because Hamilton feeds off that. He knows exactly how to respond to that kind of stuff.
He's been around for a while. It's not the first time he's been booed.
He's up here. Like he's a smart guy. He knows how to deal with this stuff. He's been booed, but he's received much worse than boos.
Absolutely,
like, much worse than boos. So
in
he can
recent
handle
weeks.
a few boos.
Yeah.
So it's and clearly, as demonstrated by his performance, I think he can handle it. So it's just disappointing that that's the way that people feel the need to react. But yeah, otherwise it was there wasn't a whole lot else. I do think it was a fantastic lap from Gasly. I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done there. He's done a lot with that machinery. It's about time Gasly got some good results here. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite the case here. He did manage to squeeze. He would have got P5 or P6 in the end. So that would have been, that's still a very good result for him. But he's showing that consistency again. It hasn't quite translated into the race as much recently, but at least he's making it happen on the Saturday. He is a great qualifier. That's about it for qualifying for me. It was, like I say, it was kind of a bit procedural in a way. It didn't really, didn't get a sense that it was going to be a crazy weekend until turn one. Should we start with that? Should we get going?
I think it's only fair to start with turn one. Do you want to talk us through it?
Well, we get a crawl off the line, as expected in the conditions, because there's been rain earlier with the support series and it hasn't fully dried up, but it also hasn't fully stopped raining. There was a feeling that it was going to get a lot heavier at one point, which it didn't quite seem to do.
No, it didn't ever happen, did it?
But it did rain. It did continue to rain through the start phase, such as it was, because there was a red flag shortly after. But as they all went off the line, Bottas just goes way too deep. Nobody really knows exactly where the breaking point is because they haven't practiced like this. They're guessing to a certain extent. Maybe their brake balances will be wrong and they'll lock up. But Bottas goes way too deep, just loses control of his car under braking and whacks into Norris. Norris has no chance, goes careering into Verstappen. And then Bottas goes on to hit Perez as well. And he tries to, whilst he's trying to recover his position. We also have Stroll, who tries to go over the grass, possibly to avoid contact or make a correction. I couldn't tell if he'd He'd like locked up and he was going too fast after locking up or something, and just ended up going over the grass. He ends up hitting Leclerc, who in turn taps Ricciardo, who spins around. So it's this chain reaction, as normally happens when you get these big events like this. Then suddenly we've got Mercedes without Bottas, who's out. Red Bull without Perez, who's out. And then during the restart, McLaren lose Norris. We also lose Mazepin. That happens in the pit stop. So loads of people are out. Everything is thrown into complete chaos. Hamilton is leading the race. And then we can talk a little bit more about what happens with the restart. So just sticking with that opening phase, a pretty mad opening turn one. Presumably the blame and the penalty given here is pretty open and shut for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I always thought there might have been some contact going into turn one, given the conditions. Bottas seemed to have a lot of speed, and even when he hit Norris in front of him, he carried a lot of speed into Perez, which is why Perez ended up retiring. And obviously, very unlucky for one Mercedes to take out two Red Bulls, because Max had severe damage for the whole race, and we'll get onto that later on. But also Stroll, I think what you said was very true. He locked up, or he realised he was going too fast, and to take avoiding action, he couldn't go left into the path of the traffic. So his other option was carry on going straight and rear end someone or go onto the grass, but there was less traction on the grass. So he kind of just not sped up, but didn't slow down anywhere near as he expected to. And then went into Charles, who suffered quite badly, and then who hit Ricciardo, who ended up backwards. It was just an absolute...
Of course, Leclerc was out as well, yeah.
What a mess. Like, what's it? 6 cars out within the first couple of laps, because obviously Norris and I think Leclerc retired in the pit lane once they came round.
Leclerc was out by the side of the track, I think. But
was he?
Yeah.
Honestly, I was struggling to keep track of who was where and what was going on. At one point, well, I think, who was P2? I think Ocon came out in that mess in P2. And I was, well, it says a lot. You know, the guy won the race, but he came out of all this mess in P2, and he must have thought he was the luckiest guy alive. And Hamilton must have thought, I don't know what I've done to deserve this, but somehow my teammate has bottled it and caused both the blessed. Hamilton does have the best fans, and Bottas is one of them, and took out both the Red Bulls. It was just, you can't write this stuff. If it was not, you know, we walked away from Silverstone thinking...
There's some people on Twitter that are giving it a damn good go. If they can make something up that sounds spicy, they'll do it.
Yeah, it's probably already going around. But coming away from Silverstone, all the eyes were on Hamilton and Max, and they both had good launches, and they both looked like they were going to make the corner pretty well without any contact. And who knows what the rest of the lap would have told. But Bottas, what a colossal mistake. And he's been on the receiving end of mistakes this year with Russell in, was it Imola?
Yeah.
And this one was all on him. 5-place grid penalty for the next race. Very harsh penalty, but well deserved, because he had taken out, well, he'd taken out 3 cars and then obviously caused 2 to retire. And Mazepin, I feel like, is very unlucky because he managed to avoid all this contact and then got hit in the way to the pits. And this is a race which would have been really important for Haas, because they could have capitalized on this. If they had another car in the track, they could have held up a couple more cars or prioritized one car. And I'll get on to Williams later on and how they played an absolute weldy with their drivers. But in a race where you've already got 5 people not finishing, the chances are higher than usual to get both your cars or one of your cars in the points, and points mean prizes. And I did feel sorry for Mazepin. It was a real unlucky turn of events for him. But what a lap one! Absolutely just crazy.
I don't know if it was Giovinazzi or Raikkonen. Obviously, one of the Alphas was released into the path of Mazepin. That was like an unsafe release, and they just didn't seem to get there wasn't even an investigation for it, as far as I could tell. I don't think anything happened. I know Giovinazzi got a stop-go for speeding in the pit lane at one point.
And Raikkonen got a 10-second time penalty.
Was that for the unsafe release?
Yeah.
Okay, he did get it. I can't remember if he actually got anything for it, because it was pretty slam dunk. And I thought McLaren might get one later on too for Norris, but he ended up retiring. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if maybe they didn't pursue it just because he was out of the race. But so then we had, like you say, we had this bizarre setup for the restart because obviously it caused a red flag. There was a ridiculous amount of debris, etc. We'd had other people retiring during the pit stops whilst the safety car was going round. So there's clearly carnage going on. They were going to need a restart, and it was going to be a standing start, which is good. That's what we want. And then we had the restart seeing Hamilton P1, Ocon P2, Vettel P3. Sainz was in P4, up from 15th. Tsunoda was in P5. That's up like 10 or 11 places. Latifi P6. Alonso was up from P9, I think, to P7. Russell P8. Raikkonen P9. Schumacher P10. That's the starting grid for a race after, 3 or 4 laps. Pretty mad. So it was all to play for. But it was particularly amusing to me when they all came to the grid again because they had the normal. It wasn't a formation lap. It was It was just a lap of the race that they did behind the safety car. Right, the safety car comes out, and then they came along. Is that right?
Yes. So I think the safety car.
But it's not a formation lap.
No, that it was just an outlap, really, wasn't it? It was to go from the pits to a standing start. So I think it was did they treat it like a safety like a formation lap where they can't talk to the crew and the crew can't talk to the drivers. The driver has to make all the decisions.
That's during a formation lap. You can't do that. Yeah.
I think the same rules apply for the lap going to the start of the grid again. Because those drivers who came in, I don't think
they're allowed to talk to each other.
Okay, not at all.
It's only on the formation lap that they can't do it, but this isn't a formation lap. It's a lap of the race. So it's interesting that Hamilton didn't go in for tyres. It means it wasn't only his decision because the team could have said to him, everyone's pitting, come in for dries. And Hamilton was complaining earlier before the restart, we should have started on dries. But then didn't pit. So it was an interesting situation, and I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the grid, and it's just Lewis Hamilton on the grid. Lewis Hamilton wins the world championship by removing all the other competitors.
It was like a glitch. It was like a glitch on like a Formula One game where one car's on the grid and everyone else is just not turned up to the race. And it was very bizarre because clearly the camera angle was poised for a brilliant restart of all these cars going into turn 1, and it was just the one Mercedes on P1 with the dramatic 5 red lights, and it was like, and away he goes. It was just one car going up until the white line. It was absolutely hilarious, but man.
So it was really strange the fact that they didn't pit for that. Obviously, they took the gamble. Maybe I don't really know exactly if that's what they were trying to do. They thought that it would be worth it, but Hamilton was complaining that he wanted slicks at the start of the race and then didn't decide to pit. And they could have communicated that to him because it's not a formation lap. So I'm pretty sure they were able to communicate just fine.
I think maybe Ocon in P2 was told, do whatever Hamilton doesn't. Or maybe he was told to come in for dries. And then every single team was like, got on the radio straight in. It was like, follow him in. There was double stacking. I was just about to say triple stacking, but that's not a thing. But every team who had 2 cars on the grid were definitely double stacking. But what a sight to see Hamilton start that race all by himself. Honestly, it was so funny. It's only one of those moments which go down in history of like the funniest race starts of just one driver and the rest of them are in the pits.
It was just something about that visual was really funny to me at the time. I just thought it was really
memes will be made out of that for a long time. It just really
tickled me. Yeah. Yeah, somebody I can't find it now. I was just trying to look for it, but somebody on Reddit was saying that they'd listened to the radios during that lap and that they were all communicating and saying things like, this is what the track's like, or maybe we should box. Yeah. So it was just like a normal lap to them. So, and none of them obviously got penalised or investigated clearly so far. So they must have been able to do it because it's not a formation lap technically.
Yeah, fair enough.
That was amusing. So we ended up with that setup there, and we had the restart. Hamilton, off he goes, and then everyone sort of follows afterwards. And that was kind of the end of our first lap shenanigans. Then we were out into the normal race again, but with this crazy turn of events. I just want to say before we move on that this, as unpredictable as this was, and it was great. It was to see all these cars out of position and see how they handle it, and we saw a really, really entertaining race today. Something about it is a little bit deflating for me because initially I thought we were going to see Hamilton and Verstappen, because Hamilton obviously ends up out of position having to pit, so he ends up at the back. And I thought we were going to see Hamilton and Verstappen fighting from the back, but also fighting each other as they fight to get to the back to see how they can get up. And we didn't get that. We didn't get the big sort of showdown after the British Grand Prix at all. It just didn't happen because Verstappen's car, like he had a whole barge board missing and had floor damage and stuff. And Hamilton had managed to get away without all of that because obviously he had just carried on through whilst everything behind him was going crazy. And so we didn't get that showdown, but we got a very different race instead. So I can't help but feel that as exciting as it was, I was initially hoping for the return, and it didn't happen.
I get what you mean.
Return to the drama.
It's strange to say that the race was a little anticlimactic in that sense.
In a way,
that we didn't have the massive Hamilton-Max fight, even for P1 and 2. But like you said, going through from P14, I think he came out of when Lewis boxed on that third lap eventually for dries. And I thought, here we go. Like you thought, we're going to see Lewis and Max or Max try and hold Lewis up for as long as possible. And I think the damage on his car was just too much because Max struggled the whole race. And his perseverance to continue carrying on was unbelievable because who knows what this championship will go down to. But scoring 2 points or 1 point today, I can't remember where he finished. I think he finished in P10, which is now P9. Yeah, he's picked up a couple of points there, which may make a massive difference going into the end of the year.
I guess we should say, because you teased the breaking news and then didn't mention it, but it's now going to affect everything that we talk about in this podcast.
Okay, should we talk about it then?
Just mention what the breaking news is, just so that we can get that out of the way now that we're covering the race proper.
So Sebastian Vettel has been disqualified from the Hungarian Grand Prix due to a technical regulation. So at the end of each race, the cars have to have their fuel samples, their fuel loads dipped. It's because they got to be sampled by the technical stewards or the FIA and the same people. And to do that, you need to produce a litre of fuel. And for whatever reason, Aston Martin can't produce a whole litre of fuel out of that car. They can only produce a third, or 300 mils. Now, Aston Martin have come out and said there should be 1.44 litres of fuel in that car, but for whatever reason, because fuel is not a constant state, we discussed this before the podcast, it changes in temperature, in movement, in different conditions, in whatever pressure it's in. For whatever reason, Aston Martin can't extract a litre of fuel out of that car. Therefore, the fuel can't be sampled and the sample can't be compared and quality controlled, which means the car, it has not been signed off, which means whatever result Sebastian Vettel got is now doesn't matter. That fantastic drive he did, and we'll talk about his drive, I'm sure we will, doesn't matter because he's been disqualified from the Grand Prix entirely. Obviously,
It's
Aston Martin have a right
tragic
to appeal, but it's pretty black and white when you can't produce a sample. And I don't think you can go back a couple of days later with a litre of fuel you've got from the car, from the race. It's a pretty time-sensitive situation, and I think that time has come and gone now. So, that was the breaking news. I mean, we literally discovered that probably a minute or two before we started recording this podcast.
Yeah, not long before, because it's only just come out. It's one of those regulations that teams are following every week. I mean, week after week, they have to follow these things in order to make sure that the car is up to spec and that nobody's doing any cheating and all the rest of it. And this just happens to be one of those times where they've not been able to do it. Somebody far more qualified than me can probably explain exactly how it works with the fuel in the tank, because I just know that they weigh it rather than do it based on how many litres or anything like that, because like you mentioned, the state of the fuel changes during the race depending on temperature and all sorts of things like that. So a bit of one of those aberrations where it's just, the rules are the rules and people follow this all the time without issue, and they've not been able to do it for whatever reason. So Sebastian Vettel, as good as his drive was, is all for naught, unfortunately. So
and that
we have
would have
to
been
bear
a
in
second
mind
podium.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he got P2 beforehand as well, didn't he?
In Baku.
Yeah, so he's got 2 P2s in the season. I don't know if he maybe saw that coming after some of the results they got earlier in the season, but that was in spirit. It's a good thing, even if the points didn't come out for it. And Yeah, he did drive a good race, but it does mean that his position, having been disqualified, it means that everything else we look at the race results, everyone gets bumped up by one. So it kind of changes the way we look at the end of the race a bit. That's the qualifying and the first lap kind of out the way. We're kind of looking at the race proper now. Where do you want to start, Shane?
I want to start with Williams, but I'm not going to talk about the points straight away. I'm going to talk about each the drivers individually and how well they've both done to get into the positions they've got today. Now, for those of you who've been listening from day one, you've always heard me say Williams for points or George for points next week, and I'm over the moon. I'm absolutely buzzing that George has scored points in that Williams. At no point did I ever think that Nicholas Latifi would outscore George with those points in the same race, because let's be honest, their race paces have been very similar, but due to George qualifying higher, he's always had that advantage going into the race. But that didn't it didn't go to George's head. George came over the radio and said something during the race, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and maybe was a secret message to Mercedes. Is exactly what I thought straight away. So George came over the radio and said, "We need to focus on Nicholas's race. Do whatever you need to do to help him. You can sacrifice my race." And I think what George was saying. You can back me up into the cars behind me. You can box me late. Give him the priority strategy. If I can back the cars up and he can get an extra couple of seconds on the cars behind me, let's do it. Let's sacrifice my race to help his teammate, which I thought was absolutely fantastic and great sportsmanship from a guy who knows how much those points would mean to Williams. But also, a little bit of me on the side thought, what are Mercedes looking for at the moment? A competitive driver, but also the ultimate wingman. And I thought, you know what? What George has done right there. I mean, Bottas was the ultimate wingman this week. You're not wrong.
Yeah, but maybe doing a pretty good job as far as I can tell.
Maybe they want a wingman who won't slack it into turn one. Obviously, seriously now, with all the seats up for grabs, maybe that was a little message. Just maybe 10% was worth of a message to Mercedes saying, "Look, I know how to play the team game. I know when my teammates are in a better position and how we can capitalize on points. This is me. I'm still here. Don't forget me." Especially after Bottas stacked it into turn one. What do you make of that whole situation?
Yeah, that radio message about because what he said was something like, if you want to prioritize Nicky for the points or something, you need to sacrifice my race to prioritize Nicky for points. Do that or whatever, something along those lines. And There's two things that I think are worth mentioning here. Obviously, it's good that he says that. It shows that he is a team player, and like you say, there are people that are going to hear those messages and pay attention to those messages. So I'm sure that's part of it. He wants to be seen to be a team player.
Yeah,
but also,
oh god, here it comes.
He's also he's telling them what they were going to do anyway, because Latifi was ahead, so obviously they're going to you always prioritize the driver that's ahead. I can't imagine a driver getting on the radio and saying, "I know I'm behind, but I'm more important, so can you prioritize me?" That would be pretty ridiculous. Secondly, if let's say Alfa Romeo were almost up for the points and Giovinazzi got on the blower and was like, "Hey, if you need to ruin my race so that Kimi can get points, that's fine, let's go to it." Would that be broadcast? Because
I'm not sure.
There's a sort of we do hear a lot from Hamilton and Russell in these races.
Yes, we do.
There is a sort of British broadcaster bias going on there that you kind of have to admit it is there. You do tend to hear from those British drivers more often. So there's a bit of a focus on, isn't George Russell a good lad because he's done that?
He is a great lad, but also I'm going to counteract your points. All right, okay, yeah, I completely understand that. This is where the podcast's going to get interesting. Giovinazzi and Raikkonen have both scored points in the past over previous seasons. This is Russell's first time not first time in the points. He's obviously been in the points before and then come out of them swiftly. But this is the first time he's had a real shot at scoring some points for the Williams, and he was still prepared to sacrifice his own race.
But of course,
towards the end of that race, he was a little bit ropey on whether he was going to finish P9, P10, or P11 to better his teammate.
He was obviously going to do that though, because he's kind of contractually obligated to do so. Basically, his role as a driver is to maximize the thing for the team. Like, there are times where drivers might try and push it, and maybe he might have been chasing after Latifi and like they're fighting for the same position, and maybe he might have been like, no, I'm going to go for it. And sometimes drivers do that. But this is a situation of him talking over the radio, telling the team to do what they're already doing.
So was it more to attract the attention of Mercedes, saying, "Hey, I'm a team player. You can put me on number 2 car."
I'm trying not to be too cynical about this, I promise.
It sounds like it.
I'm doing the best I can. He genuinely meant it, I'm sure. Like, it's not that I don't believe that he didn't mean like he does. He's a good lad, obviously. Like, obviously he means it. But I think that is something that any driver in that position almost certainly would have done, because the idea that any driver would say over the radio, yeah, I know, but we're both trying to get points here. So can we, make it fair so that we both get points? Because I want some points as well. No driver's going to say that, are they? So, and it just so happens that his got broadcast. Did anybody else say it about it? I don't know. Probably not. But
I don't know. You have to watch their broadcast.
Yeah, you'll have to see what they went on at. But I think it's good on him. Like, it's a nice thing to say he's a team player. There's a message for Mercedes there that if they're paying attention, he's a good team player. But people are talking about it as if this shows like the virtue of the second coming of Christ, and it's
goodness.
It's like, come on, like, let's calm down a little bit. He's a good lad. Let's not go crazy.
All right, okay. Well, that was one of my talking points. Thank you so much for discrediting it. I really appreciate it. So, what's your next talking point? Make sure it's a good one, because I'm going to shoot it down.
No, let's talk about Williams. We're not done with Williams yet. We got more to talk about with Williams. I got more to talk about with Russell as well, because I want to
go on.
I want to talk about Russell's restart, where he had to give those places back as well, because that was interesting.
Yeah, talk me through that, because I watched the race quite quickly and was making notes at the same time and trying to scram down some dinner as well so we can record the podcast. I kind of missed the whole shenanigans when he came out the pit lane. Was it because his pit box was quite late on in the pit lane, so he managed to go into it and then jump a couple of cars on the exit? Because on the restart, I saw 2 cars side by side coming out the pit lane, and I thought, oh, hold on a second. That doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, this is we've discussed before the consistency or apparent lack thereof of stewarding between races, right? And we've got another interesting story to add to this discussion here, I think. Not because I want to rag on the stewards, because I don't. This isn't really the stewards' fault at all. But it's just an interesting story. That's all it is. It's just an interesting thing that got me thinking
I'm
both
all
during
ears.
and
I'm all
after the
ears.
race. So obviously,
everyone's waiting for this.
Yes, obviously, what you saw was Russell coming out in P2 on the restart, and I was baffled. I was like, how has he done this? This is crazy. What did they do a pit stop in like a nanosecond? They just came in and went out. But then we saw him slowing down, and then we saw the footage of what happened to have the steward ask him to give the places back. It seems to me that Russell has committed this huge jump start and has got no penalty for it whatsoever, other than being asked to give the penalties back. So I'm thinking, this is mental. Like, look at what he's done here. If you were to jump the start from the grid normally, you'd get a penalty, unless you're Valtteri Bottas here last year, of course. Do you remember that, where he moved at the lights, but he hadn't moved because the sensor hadn't triggered, so it wasn't a jump start. Everyone in the world can see that this guy has moved, but that's not actually how you get a penalty for jumping the start. Anyway, welcome to Formula One, I guess. But so he's at the end of the pit lane. He must have stopped last because Latifi stopped before him, and he's in the last. Williams have got the last pit box, so he must have been the last person to get into a pit box. And then, as far as I can tell, between the point at which all the other cars were stationary and the moment the pit lane light went green, Russell had already exited his pit box and moved past Tsunoda, Latifi, and Vettel whilst they're all stationary.
What a guy.
And then when the light was green, he floored it from about 20 miles an hour already and was P2. Now, yes, he had to give the positions back, obviously, because that was unfair. But I was thinking at the time, how is something this blatant not a slam dunk penalty? This is crazy. And it appears that there's just no provision for it under the rules. It's just an unprecedented situation. So, and Russell, obviously, Russell unsurprisingly called it a sort of common sense decision. But it's just a matter of there's nothing in the rules that really goes against it. But when you think about it and compare it to something like a normal jump start, it's even worse because he was actually moving and then floored it from a sort of. He was trundling along the pit lane and then put his foot down. He gained a huge advantage in a really blatant fashion. Obviously, you can't move when everyone else is stationary at the start of a race. Like, obviously, you can't be moving.
I think it was just opportunistic.
Yeah, but it's opportunistic to a ridiculous level. It was like comedic in how blatant it is.
Yeah, so, it was pretty hilarious, but
it was just pretty funny that he got nothing for that. We're like, come on, give the places back.
What's he meant to do then? He's boxed for a fresh set of softs.
He should sit still like everyone else. He should not move.
He pulls out of his box and then he's alongside Tsunoda. So does he sit beside him, or does he?
Yeah, he should just wait there.
What happens? But all the cars behind him will then go past because he's not in the lane of traffic.
Well, you can only go the pit lane speed in the pit lane.
Yeah.
So if he lines up in such a manner in the position that he should be in, which is the position he would have been in when he comes out of his pit box, I guess, which as I understand it should be behind Tsunoda. He should wait there, and then when they go, he will go at the same speed as whoever is behind him, and then as he exits the pit lane, then he'll return to racing speed. That's clearly what he should do, because you can't overtake people before the race has started.
Okay.
And you definitely can't be moving before the lights go out.
Well,
so that's opportunism to a serious level. That is.
I'll have to watch some replays.
Like you say, I'm not having a go at the stewards. There's clearly no provision for it in the rules, I guess. Maybe there should be, because that's the.
I'm sure there will be now.
To me. Yeah, but it's hard to really sort of throw the book at Russell because, like you say, he's just being opportunistic. But at the same time, that is so blatant and so mad. To come away with something like that with no penalty is surprising when you consider things that we've seen get penalties. So it's just another interesting tale to add to the saga of consistency of giving of penalties and the way the rules work in Formula One go between races. So I just thought that was an interesting tale and the way that I saw that particular incident. Keeping things on Williams, just to finish up with Williams here. I've put in my notes here, of course George finally scores, but he's outscored by Latifi.
I know.
I put that in my notes. I think Latifi deserves just as much, if not more credit
100%.
For his points. Like he had a great race, he stayed out of trouble and he had the pace and he was in P3 for a reasonable amount of time as well and did very well. He had a cracking start. His race pace was more than a match for his teammates. And of course he finished a position higher, so he got more points. And so good on Latifi, and it's taken a pretty surprising set of events to get the team some points, as was the case in 2019, for example, at the Hockenheim,
Germany,
and where they managed to get that 1 point from Kubica. The question is, are they going to be able to do it on the regular under what we might consider sort of normal circumstances?
If you talk about normal circumstances, this was an unusual weekend for Williams in the fact that George didn't reach Q2 for the first time this year. So at the start of this weekend, it already looked like Williams were slightly on the back foot. And I think I mean as a compliment, because Williams have achieved so much this year going into Q2, and Nicholas has been close to Q2 a couple of times. So both of them to be in Q1, out of Q1, it was a bad weekend for them. But then to turn it around in the race, like you said, really unusual circumstances to score both those points. It was great. We fast forward 4 weeks' time. We're in Belgium, Spa. I think Williams are at a point in this year where they're just on the edge of points, aren't they? They're hovering around the P12, P13, P11 positions quite comfortably of one or two of their drivers. They just need to step it up ever so slightly. So will they score any more points this year? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think we have another race like this. That would be quite interesting.
I think that's going to be the opportunities for them to do it. I think I'd be surprised if they scored again under, again, it's hard to say what normal circumstances are really.
Yeah.
Like it's a very
dry race.
Nebulous term. But yeah, a dry race from start to finish with like no safety cars, for example. It's hard to imagine them. Yeah, maybe something like that. But it's hard to imagine them scoring again unless we have a similar race like that, unless they really start getting their development in places where they finally have a car that's really able to compete with people this season. I don't know if they really intend to do that. I don't know if they're just focusing more on 2022. I don't know for certain. But it's up to Williams and the other teams with only a handful of opportunities to score each season to kind of take those chances and stay out of trouble before the checkered flag. They did it today, and they took the spoils at last. And it is, of course, first Williams point since Kubica that I mentioned, and of course the first double points since Italy 2018. So
Oh, wow.
Williams are finally bucking the trend. I think mentally this will be really big for them as well, because it must be really, really tough just being so close to points all the time and never quite getting them. And now they've not just got a point, they've got 10 points.
Yeah.
So it's got to be a serious weight off their shoulders as well for the
Also,
staff as
financially
well as
as well. Financially as well. It's such a big difference from P10 in the championships to P8. Because obviously they were above Haas, and now they'll be above. No, not yet. But it's a good start. It's a really good start going into the summer break, having 10 points to your name and being P8 in the Constructors' Championship.
So fingers crossed they can hold on to it. But there's going to be some challenges for it, and we might have another situation like this, and it's,
could be Haas
who end up in this situation instead. You just don't know. We saw a bit of fight from them today as well.
We really did. It was quite impressive.
Yeah, it was nice to actually have something to write about Haas. I was like, oh my God, Mick Schumacher's doing something. He's actually fighting with someone. I mean, doesn't stand a chance, but, he's giving it a good go.
It was hard racing as well. I was really impressed. He did not care who was alongside him. He fought hard, but clean, hard racing.
Yeah, he found what it was like to be next to Max Verstappen, who gave him a little nudge coming out of turn 4 or whatever, turn 3, I think it was. So yeah, that was amusing. He got a taste of it there. He was in it. He was right in the thick of it. So that was fun. But I don't really have too much to say about Haas other than that. So I tag them onto our Williams bit.
Yeah, fair enough. I did say one of the best overtakes I thought this week was George Russell on Schumacher going around the outside of turn 3.
Overtake, yeah.
This was shortly after Lewis Hamilton on George Russell. No, it was Lewis Hamilton on Yuki Tsunoda going into turn 4 on the outside, which I thought was very brave indeed. And then George pulled a very similarly good move on Schumacher around the inside of turn 3. It was just great. More impressive. I was more impressed from Lewis, because any of you who know what turn 4 looks like, it's a blind left-hander at quite some decent speed, and it's on the crest of a hill, and it's not really the most obvious overtaking position in the world. But Lewis, who was already scoring a handful of points over Max, I thought might play it a little bit easier this race, just to try and level the playing field, or like start afresh going into the second part of the season. But he was sending moves all over the place, and later on in the race, it was he sent it around the outside of Alonso a couple of times, but Alonso, being Alonso, was not having any of it and fought equally hard back to keep Lewis behind him. But Lewis was not playing it safe, as in like he was making some bold moves, even though actually settling for 5th or 6th in the race would have put him level with Verstappen going into the summer break.
So let's that kind of leads nicely into my next talking point, because we mentioned sort of teams having a day in the sun, as it were, although it was a day in the sun after some rain, and that was Alpine as well, who finally had their moment of excitement. Now, of course, Renault have gotten the podium before, but when you change your team like that and you bring out Alpine and you bring out new staff and you bring on Fernando Alonso as one of your drivers, then you've got something to say as a team, clearly. And they finally made that happen. Of course, with Esteban Ocon now being a Grand Prix winner, they've got a win under their belt. But it wasn't all Ocon. Alonso had something to say for it as well, and it was a big part of a team effort for them today. There's 2 parts to Alpine's successes today. One of them a literal victory, because obviously Ocon actually won, and the other one kind of something kind of like a spiritual victory, it felt like. Taking a look at the first one, of course, we have the battle between Vettel and Ocon. This obviously kicked off fairly early, because we had just had a tussle between the two of them after Hamilton had to pit. So Hamilton comes out at the back of the grid, so that leaves Ocon in the lead of the race. And there was a tussle at first. Sometimes Vettel was gaining, and then Ocon would pull away a little bit, and it was very uncertain what was going to happen. It was very entertaining to see how they were going to fight it out. Now, what was going through your mind as this battle was going on in the opening laps? Did you think it would stay looking this way? Was it kind of inevitable that someone else would catch up? Did you peg either Vettel or Ocon particularly for the win, or you were like, Latifi's going to run straight through and win this.
At no point did I think Latifi was going to win the race.
Oh, poor Nicholas.
But I'm so sorry. You've had a great week, but there's still some time to be found. But no, it's very interesting because from lap 10 onwards, so there's 70 laps of this race, Ocon and Vettel were going at it, and I thought, like you said, they've been going at it for a while. They keep on getting close, and then Ocon will pull a little bit of distance, and then Vettel will close it, and then it just kept on rinse and repeating itself. And that happened all the way up until the pit stop phase, where I think Vettel came in first, went for the undercut, because we already saw how powerful that undercut was, triggered by Mercedes, who went from having a terrible decision with the tyres to one of the best decisions of the season with their tyres, really clawed back the race for Lewis, but we'll talk on that later on. But Aston Martin came in and had not the best pit stop in the world. It was by no means awful, but when you're racing for the win here, you needed to have a nice clean pit stop, and Vettel didn't. Came out, had a really good outlap, but Ocon came in and had a flawless. He was a little bit slow coming into the pits, but he hit his marks. The pit crew did exactly what they needed to do and came out and kept Vettel behind him. And then we had a little bit of a excitement for a lap or two whilst Vettel had warmer tyres and they were up to racing speeds and the temperatures were already embedded in. But Ocon just put that car exactly where he needed to put it. And I have to say, for a guy who's not really had much experience in the last 5 or 6 years running at the front of the grid, he's always been in the midfield pack. He did not look like he was panicking at all. That car was always under control, managed to gap perfectly. I'm not sure what the state of the vehicle was at the end of the race or what was going through his head, but really seemed to be in control of the whole situation. And to be fair, Vettel was also pushing as hard as he could. And he said, I think Aston Martin had the faster car, but we saw how much Lewis struggled to get through the field on fresher tyres in the fastest car, even though he had a 2-second faster lap over, say, Alonso. It took him 6 or 7 laps to get past him. Having quite equally paced cars like the Aston Martin and the Alpine, it would have been difficult to overtake. So I think it was impressive to have that battle go all the way to the checkered flag.
Yeah, we saw an interesting one because, like you said, they are quite similarly powered. Vettel's claimed that Aston Martin had the fastest car, and obviously he would say that, really. But the reality is that both Alpines out-qualified both Aston Martins on Saturday. And Ocon really seemed to have the measure of him to me. I think that even though the cars are similar, it became a bit of a tyre management thing, and we talked about the pit stop as well. And he had the powerful undercut. 3.3 seconds Vettel was stationary for. That proved just far too much for him to overcome. He did have an amazing outlap, Vettel, but it was just it was not enough to overturn that deficit. But overall, I think Ocon had the measure of him. He, like you say, he was so confident. He seemed to be. It wasn't rattled at all by the situation. He came out from that restart, and we heard his engineer say, Esteban, you're leading the race, so let's do this. And he did. He just seemed to deal with it. There were situations where he had to negotiate back markers where Vettel got close. Didn't panic. He kept it under control. There wasn't any sort of putting a foot wrong here and then having to recover it. He was just stable all the way through. He just seemed to have a good attitude towards the whole thing on the radio and the like. And I think that when it comes to tyre management in such a situation, which was clearly important, I think I would put my money on Ocon in that situation because he's proven an ability to do that and to manage those tyres and to do long streaks and to do it in quite a calm way. Sometimes his race pace lets him down. I think he's been a bit inconsistent with that this season. That's true of Saturdays as well, I suppose. He's not had the consistency of results. But then again, the same is true of Sebastian Vettel. So it was a very interesting battle between the two of them. The second part of Alpine's day in the sun is, of course, Alonso and Hamilton going at it again. And yes, Alonso didn't come out on top. He was did eventually get past. But I think we saw an absolute masterclass in defensive driving from Fernando Alonso. I think there are quite a few drivers on the grid who could learn a thing or two from the way that he positions his car going into some of these corners. And of course, it's great to see these two former teammates going at each other once again. That was really, really entertaining. Lap 38, we saw Alpine P1 and P2, which must have been nice for them to see, as well as them flying in formation at the end of the race during the victory lap. Obviously, this race was quite an unusual and unpredictable affair, as we mentioned, but the trend is upwards for Alpine, it appears, or Alpine, especially for Fernando Alonso, who's overcome a bit of rustiness to register what will now be a P4 finish, of course, because of Vettel's disqualification.
Your wild prediction at the start of the year
I backed the wrong Alpine.
Was for Fernando Alonso to win a race. And I tell you what, at one point today, I thought, oh, blimey, Alex's wild prediction may come true. Obviously, Ocon had the better of him, but
he was P1, and I said to myself, "Don't pit, just don't pit, stay out. I need this to come true. This would be mad.
It would have been incredible. It would have been an amazing guess."
And to think that I was one of those people who, when they first talked about Alonso coming back into F1, I was one of those people who said to you, you remember, I was like, Fernando Alonso, he's going to be 40. Like, isn't F1 a bit of a? Isn't it a bit? I didn't say it was past it, but I did say that F1 was a bit, had become something of a young man's game, and it's, can he really hold it together against all these young bucks? And the answer is yes. The answer is definitely yes. And I'm actually really happy to see that. And I did, I put them in my bold predictions between the season because I think eventually I was like, come on, it's Fernando Alonso. He's one of the greatest. So fingers crossed.
Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about really quickly, and I've already alluded to it earlier on in the podcast, is the Mercedes strategy. And they've gone from highs to lows in this race. They went from the lows of leaving Hamilton out on the intermediate tyres when every other car in the field box for the softs or for the mediums, the dry tyres, which was a complete blunder, if you ask me, or if you ask anyone. It was a complete mess up, and I'm sure they'll do a lovely Q&A on it later on in the week. But equally, they clawed it back. They identified that Lewis was struggling on the mediums. He was on the freshest mediums through anyone because he boxed a lap later than everyone, but then decided to pull off the biggest undercut I've probably seen in recent history by boxing for those hards, setting some blistering lap times, 2.5 seconds, 3 seconds faster than the race leaders, and managed to jump, was it 3 or 4 cars in the pits over the next couple of laps? He really put himself back in the in contention for the win by that move. And obviously, half it's Mercedes making that call, but half it is also Lewis making those tyres work and going for it. Lewis, at the end of the race, made 4 stops and finished in P2. And finished 1.5 seconds off the race winner. I mean, that's crazy, right? It's absolutely mad. So, as much as Mercedes... Oh, how can they go? This is what just confuses me about Mercedes. They go from being perfect and absolutely spot on to a huge mess up, like we've seen in past times with pit stops or strategies, or with Russell in the car. And this just like leaving Lewis Hamilton out on intermediate tyres just feels like one of those strategy calls which will haunt them for a long time because it was a silly mistake. But then they pulled it back by doing this worldie of an undercut. It was a great team play, but how can you praise a team who's messed up so much already? It was a really strange one.
Yeah, that undercut was pretty much perfect. Getting Verstappen and Ricciardo and Russell all in one go. And then you followed that shortly after, not too long after, I think, with a great overtake on Tsunoda for P5.
Incredible.
At that fast left-hander turn 4. That was a very nice overtake. And he pits again later on, lap 48. Yeah, so you have 4 pit stops in total. Then obviously he had his battle with Alonso. He wasn't very happy with Alonso's defensive driving. He was like, "Oh, he's all over the place" or something. It's like,
yeah, he's gonna be.
Like, would you expect? Do you want to just give you the place? But then drivers do that, don't they? They're there and they get frustrated, and the adrenaline pumps, and again, we've mentioned before about how when you think about drivers who complain on the radio, it's largely the perception seems to largely come from who we actually hear from on the radio, and we hear from Hamilton a lot.
All the time.
When Hamilton gets frustrated, he's on the radio. But I feel like we don't necessarily hear everyone else's frustrations on the radio. So I'm aware that there's perhaps a disproportionate amount of particular drivers being heard on the broadcast. It's not that they're not on the radio; it's that they're just not being broadcast. So I feel like I've always got to be aware of that and try and figure out what's going on after the fact. Unfortunately, no, you don't get that here in the UK, do we?
Don't get F1 TV here because we've got Sky Sports F1 instead.
Yeah, it's sort of Yeah.
10 times the cost and 10 times the less action. We get one on board camera, and that's about it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sky. It's great.
Yeah, cheers. Can't wait for, I think it's 2025 where that runs up.
Yeah.
Just want to talk about the Alonso Hamilton fight, but not about the fight itself. I'm going to go off a little bit of a tangent here, so I do apologize. But it was really refreshing to hear Nico Rosberg as part of this Sky Sports commentary team, because he is spot on with everything he says. And let me just quantify what I mean. In qualifying, somebody locked up. Nico Rosberg, he's lost 2 temps. Goes through sector 1 split, he's 2 temps down. Incredible stuff. He calls it as it is. Someone breaks late. He's missed that. Or he just calls it every racing incident or any move, which you hear over the radio. So when Lewis went over the radio and says, Alonso's all over the place, Nico's like, no, it wasn't. Get on with it. It's racing. Equally, when Lewis is on the radio and says, my tyres are shot, I can't get anywhere near him. And Nico's like, right, come on, you can. You've got this. You've got this. The pace is there. Nico has a really good sense of direction or really good judgment call on these current cars. And obviously he's driven one in the last couple of years. He's a world champion, of course. But it's really refreshing to hear his analysis. And it's I don't know what you think of it, but I really, really enjoy his take on situations. He's just cutthroat. There's no in-between rubbish. It might be a penalty, it might not be a penalty. He's like, right, that's well deserved. Done. Move on. I love it.
Yeah, Rosberg is a good pundit, and like you say, it's a good combination between him having the experience with these types of cars, him personally knowing the people involved in these teams, and obviously knowing Lewis Hamilton. He has an understanding of the drivers as well. He himself as a driver, he understands the mentality. He's very, he's very forthright, and like you say, he tends to be quite decisive in what he thinks is going on. He's not afraid to shake up the status quo in the commentary box a little bit. On Saturday, Ricardo went out and he swore over the radio, and for whatever reason, the censor didn't catch it, and it got broadcast live. And just as Crofty's about to go, I'm terribly sorry for the language that you just heard, Nico Rosberg jumped straight in and is like, but that's the right word. He said the right word there. He should be saying that, because that's not a good result at all. So it's that's exactly the sort of thing that you can expect from Rosberg.
Rightio, so that wraps up our talking points for the Hungarian Grand Prix. And now we're going to move on to our segment View from the Stands, where you guys, the fans on Twitter, Instagram, and just fans of the show, can email in or tweet us your questions, and we will do our best to get back to you all. And the first one is from Daniel Fergie 25. Thank you very much for tweeting in again. And Daniel has said, if you had to pick an underrated moment from the race today, which moment would it be? His would be Williams finally securing double points. If I had to pick an underrated moment from the race today, I feel like there was quite a lot of underrated moments just because of the caliber of drivers racing up in the top 5 or 6 places. It was a lot of drivers had a very good performance, but what was underrated? Alex, over to you.
I'm just trying to think of when we say underrated. Yeah, I suppose something that maybe not as many people are talking about. There's a couple of nice little moments here. I'm just looking through my notes that I made when I was watching it. I think Gasly had a really, really nice overtake on Latifi for P7. He had this massive lunge into turn 1. It was a huge late braking, and thought that was a very impressive, bold move from Gasly. And later on, he also took the fastest lap point away from Hamilton. I wonder if Helmut Marko was on the radio to Franz Tost saying, get your guy, he's got a big enough gap to his teammate, get him to pit for the fastest lap so Hamilton doesn't get another one. So Gasly had a few little moments for me that were pretty underrated, and he's not quite got that opportunity to really show himself. I mean, he's on the podium in Baku, wasn't he? So he had a little moment there, but it doesn't feel like he's been able to translate that kind of quality starting position into a really definitive race. There's something where that's just not quite happened, because he got caught up a little bit in this race and then had to recover a little bit. So don't know. I feel like we're still yet to see even more from Gasly, and I think the AlphaTauri car in general has not quite been made full potential made of it just yet.
I'm going to go with Schumacher. because he didn't have many overtakes. However, we're used to seeing Schumacher at the back of the grid with Mazepin, those two fighting for P19 and P20. But actually, this week we saw Schumacher in a decent position, and obviously he fell through the grid, falling back into P13 where he finished, which is probably now P12 given Vettel's been disqualified. But whilst he was falling back, he had to fight Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and I wouldn't say fight, but had to try and keep himself ahead. You got to look at the cars and who he's fighting at the end of the day. But his driving was very good. It was very defensive driving, but it was always on the line, always a good side of the line. It was very hard defensive driving, and I really enjoyed it. And it was so refreshing to see a young driver like Mick have an opportunity to defend against the likes of Max Verstappen and actually cause problems for him. He couldn't just be sailed past like he usually does. He was actually causing problems for really, really good drivers. And it's encouraging to see that Mick will take those opportunities, even though he's in arguably the slowest car on the grid. And I think that was quite underrated. Even though he went backwards during the race, he still put up a good fight, and it was nice to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we got to see a Haas and got to see Schumacher fighting legit for track position, and he did put up a great fight, like you say. It was an impressive drive. Mazepin didn't get a chance to do the same thing, of course, because he was out pretty early on after what happened. I'd be interested to see how he would have handled it, because obviously he has this reputation for being quite aggressive. So it'd be interesting to see whether he might have pushed his luck further, or if he'd just not been as good in defensive. It would be interesting to see how both of those drivers handle it with that particular car, just to have a bit more comparison between the two. But yeah, definitely a good drive from Schumacher. And he started the race at the back of the grid and then was P10 after the restart. So he kept himself out of trouble and did a good job there.
And that's exactly what he needs to do in that car at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your question. And if anyone else has any underrated moments, then if you're watching on YouTube, then do let us know in the comments below, or you can tweet us your most underrated moment during that race.
Thanks, Daniel. And we have a question as well from RPM legend Dave Doherty, now officially titled on Twitter as well. I'm glad that you've changed that as well. That is great. Official. We need to give maybe we need I don't know, a T-shirt with it on or something like that.
RPM legend number one.
Official.
Yeah.
The RPM legend fan club or something. I don't know. We can have a fan club.
Think about it.
That's fine.
Yeah, we'll think about it.
Anyway, on to the question. Dave asks, what were your thoughts on the reverse grid, since this was extremely exciting? Now, I think I get what Dave is on about here, because obviously, what with the craziness of turn one, there was lots of cars out of position. I think calling it a reverse grid is a little generous. I'm not sure that I can call it that, but I do see where you're coming from with all the cars out of position and the like. Yeah, it's hard to treat it as that, really, because of obviously it comes about because of the nature of what happened after turn one. And I think that is it? No, we're back again.
Okay, we're back.
It didn't last too long, that one. Let me just go from where I was saying it before. Put this back. Yeah, it's hard for me to call it a reverse grid, really, because it's just kind of not, is it? It's just a bit of a mix-up of the cars. But it was exciting to see all those cars out of position, and we've mentioned before, like with Schumacher before, that it's good to get a chance to see these drivers legitimately fighting for track position. So that made it very exciting. I think comparisons to any kind of reverse grid event, I don't know, that's a bit of a flawed comparison to me, just because it's not a reverse grid. It's not that we had a qualifying and then reversed it or something to that effect. So this is just cars out of position because of an unexpected set of circumstances, really. But it was very exciting, definitely. But a reverse grid, I struggle to call it that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. It definitely wasn't a reverse grid, but Dave is right. It was extremely exciting. And it's not the first time we've seen Hamilton being at the back of the grid on lap 1 or lap 2, and he's had to fight his way all the way through to the podium positions. And it's always a thrill to see that car max out its potential while every other car is saving fuel or saving tyres. Lewis is burning through the rubber like he's got fresh sets to go for days. And And it's just nice seeing how well that Mercedes looks compared to the rest of the field. So it was very exciting. I do agree.
Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks everyone for their questions. And I will add here as well that it was a nice surprise that we did a video, obviously, as everyone and their dog did a video on that Hamilton-Verstappen incident at Silverstone. We did a little video of it that was obviously a clip from the podcast. I don't know how many views it's got now, a few thousand, but it was a nice surprise to have that get quite a big response on YouTube. There were lots and lots of comments. There was no way that we could respond to all of them. Otherwise, I think I'd still be responding to them right now. But it was relatively civil. There were some people getting a little bit feisty in there. You know, keep it civil, keep it calm. Let's talk about the race. No need to hate on the drivers. You know, calm down. But it was very nice that lots of people got involved. Good. Yeah, there was some interesting things being discussed, and it's got people talking, and we appreciate all the comments on there, and thanks very much for getting involved. So I just wanted to add to that really, because obviously that was a big event, and that admittedly the controversy of the event probably drew people towards it because people wanted to talk about it. They wanted to have their say. Everyone had an opinion on the event. The next day, even amongst people who I know don't necessarily watch much Formula One, even they knew about it. Like, it was a big event. Yeah. It was like the British Grand Prix, and oh my God, what's happened? They've had a collision, and so that was pretty big headline news, and it was nice that we fortunately benefited from that, obviously talking about it. So thanks for everyone who got involved, basically.
Yeah, thank you very much for the support.
Now we come to Driver of the Day in Championship standings. Driver of the Day, the popular vote was for Alonso. Obviously, he did a fantastic job in holding up Hamilton. The team obviously knew that there was going to be some threat from Hamilton because he was so much faster than everybody else on track. He wasn't dealing with any damage, and obviously he's got a pretty good car. So he ended up sort of going up through the grid, and Alonso was there to kind of hold him back a little bit and to try and stem the tide so that Ocon could continue his fight for Vettel and do what he can to hold on to the win. So Alonso for being the team player there. I think Ocon deserves his due, though. I'm gonna say Ocon for driver of the day. He didn't really put a foot wrong. Handled the pressure absolutely brilliantly. He handled Vettel, a 4-time world champion, perfectly. He managed his tyres really well. Handled his own pit stop phase very nicely with both in lap and out lap. And sometimes we see some drivers get these opportunities and they never quite convert them. But Esteban, he looked really confident out there, and we saw a French driver for a French team with a French engine win a race for the first time since, I'm guessing, probably Prost for Renault in like the 80s or something. Got to be the last time that happened. I don't know exactly. Somebody can tell us in the comments. But I think Ocon deserves his due here. I've said before that I do rate him as a driver. I like his attitude. I think that he is underrated in general as a driver, but that he needs to be a bit more consistent. And the guy's got Fernando Alonso as his teammate, and he's won a race.
Yep.
So great stuff. Esteban Ocon for me.
It's a difficult one, and like I mentioned before, I've just come straight from the race, which was probably about an hour and 20 minutes ago, given how long we've been recording. I've got a couple of drivers in mind, but the one which really stands out for me is Bottas. No, I'm joking. It's because he caused the issues. Like, that's why we had such a great race. I don't usually give driver of the day to the top drivers, and it has to be a pretty good weekend for me to do so. But I can't help but feel that Hamilton has had an incredible weekend. Like, he's come off the back foot of many races where he's not been the fastest car on the grid. He's not qualified first. He's always been second to Max. Despite the fact that Max was out of the race given the damage on his car, Lewis was still at the back of the grid, still made an additional pit stop than everyone on the grid apart from one person, and finished 1.5 seconds behind the leader despite that. So my drive of the day is going to be Lewis Hamilton for a fantastic recovery drive, which he probably shouldn't have been in to begin with, but because he was in that situation, I'm going to give it to him.
Yeah, he definitely had a really good race. 2.7 seconds behind the leader,
Was
but,
it
but
2.7?
very, very impressive nonetheless.
Yeah.
And yeah, he obviously came out that first incident and was sort of untouched, but then suddenly found himself needing to be at the back of the grid because he hadn't changed his tires. So yeah, it was very up and down. Um, it's one of those circumstances where everyone seems to be struggling, and then there's Lewis Hamilton who's gaining 1.7 seconds a lap on the
Yeah.
car in front of him, and you're like, this is normal. This is just what Hamilton does. Yep, he just flies through the field and is able to get past everyone. And yeah, it's very easy to just take that for granted now because that's just kind of what he does. He's got a brilliant, brilliant car, and he knows exactly what to do with it. So yeah, I can totally understand why Hamilton has essentially come from the back to get on the podium, and with Vettel's disqualification is now P2. And I think that leads us quite nicely onto the championship standings, because we now have to rethink these standings somewhat because of the changes with the disqualification. Now, I need to double check whether the standings that we're seeing now have been updated, because this news about Vettel is so recent that I don't know whether they will have been changed or not.
Whilst you do, I've got some extra news about Vettel.
Okay.
Whilst you were sorting out your internet
Breaking
connection
news.
issues.
So we'll talk about it in 20 minutes,
news.
right?
Yeah, breaking news. Aston Martin have already launched the appeal, and they've already sent and sealed their car off so the FIA can come collect it, so they can take the sample at a later date, maybe when the fuel is available or the fuel is in the right conditions. But they've sealed off their car, and it's being sent to the FIA testing or wherever it's going to go for sampling. So it's not as clear cut as I originally thought. They are appealing it, and I think it's good that they should appeal it, because actually it was a great performance by Vettel. It'd be a shame for him to lose those 18 points and that P2 finish.
Well, if they have the opportunity to appeal it, they've
got nothing to lose and everything to gain at the moment.
Yeah.
So
we'll just have to give you the standings as it currently is, as they currently see. I'm just looking at this. This is from the BBC. This is definitely different. They're different to the ones that are on the official site, which apparently haven't been updated yet. So we'll go through it like this for now. Starting with the drivers' constructors then, because the big thing about all of this is because Max Verstappen has not scored and Lewis Hamilton has come at the moment P2, Lewis Hamilton now leads the Drivers' Championship once again with 195 points to Verstappen's 187. Lando Norris, despite being out, is still P3. I'm so gutted that he has his point streak broken. So gutted by that.
Oh my goodness, he has.
Yeah, he's scored in every single race for what, 16 races or something, and now not only has he not scored points, but he just was out after lap 2 or 3 or whatever. I think they went round once and then had to dump him out or something.
I think the only saving grace is that the guy who caused him to score no points is actually behind him in the championship and also scored no points.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I would have been furious if Bottas got away with that and then overtaken Norris for P3 in the Drivers' Championship.
It's one of those things. It's not Norris's fault. This happens. Sometimes somebody they hit your driver.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, and the fact that it happened to Ricciardo as well. And Ricciardo was disappointing, but he also was dealing with damage as well, so it's hard to know how he had to deal with that. I am annoyed that he had got passed by Raikkonen as well. Like
towards the end.
I can't accept a McLaren fighting an Alfa Romeo for track position at the moment, and that has been a situation that Daniel Ricciardo has been in far too many times this season.
Not when Lando's been fighting for podiums.
Yeah, when you consider the disparity between the two drivers, it's very, very hard to accept, I must say. But I don't really want to just go on about it, because otherwise it's
fine.
I don't really want to go between the sort of, yes, he's showing some form, and oh no, we're back here again. Like, it's just, we can just only, as a McLaren fan, you just have to wait and see what happens.
Just to own it.
Give him the season, basically. I've committed myself to that, basically.
We were thinking about doing a podcast in the summer break, weren't we, about mid-season review, so maybe we can touch on it then about how teams and drivers have done and if they've met our expectations or not. But back onto the driver standings.
Back to the standing, yeah. So Bottas P4, as you mentioned, 108. Perez, 104. Sainz and Leclerc still flying in formation to Ferrari, 6th and 7th with 83 and 80. Ricciardo is still P8 with 50 points, but it's just, it's less than half of what his teammate has got. Gasly with 49 for AlphaTauri. And Esteban Ocon obviously makes a bit of a jump now, comes up ahead of his teammate with 39 with his one win. Alonso just behind in 38. Take us through the rest of the table.
Yep, we've got Sebastian Vettel at the moment in P12 with 30 points. If that appeal does get overturned and he scores those extra 18 points, it actually puts him in P9, which is a great result for him, puts him in the top 10. But currently in P13, you've got Yuki Tsunoda with 18 points and Lance Stroll with 18 points as well on in P14. So obviously Yuki wins that on countback. Nicholas Latifi in P15 with 6 points and George Russell in P16 with 4 points. That's something I didn't think I'd be saying this week. I'd thought, we'd get to the bottom end of the grid and it'd be very, very similar to what we've seen before. But both Williams scoring points this week. Kimi Räikkönen with 2 points and Antonio Giovinazzi with 1 point. Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin both with 0 points. Moving on to the constructors' standings. Normal services have resumed. Mercedes are at the back, at the top of the championship now with 303 points halfway through the season. They've already broken the 300 barrier. With Red Bull racing on 291. So only a handful of points behind them, less than a race win in it. Less than like a P5 in it, so which is pretty good. Ferrari are back into P3 with 163 points, with McLaren also on 163 points. Alex, what do you make of that at the moment?
It's frustrating as well that they should be higher above because they've got Leclerc as a P2, haven't they? So they get the higher position because of it. Well, I did want to see a battle of some kind. I didn't want to see McLaren just kind of stuck in that P3. They're not, not close enough to get near the top two, but also much better than the people below them. Sometimes that position can be a bit dull, even though you're kind of guaranteed a pretty good finishing position. So it's the battles carrying on. This is the point at which Ricciardo, as I mentioned before, he's got to not be too much of a millstone for the team and try and pull his weight as best he can. Norris can absolutely be relied on, but then if Sainz and Leclerc are more consistent together, that will be much better for Ferrari overall. So, in the second half of the season, we'll find out how that plays out.
Yep, definitely going to be interesting. In fifth place now, we've got Alpine with 77 points, obviously scoring their first race win. Alex, want to take us through the final five?
Yeah, AlphaTauri 67 and Aston Martin 48. That battle for P5 is interesting, but Alpine have just made a serious jump into P5 now, so that's kind of changed the dynamic of that now. If they can, that gives them something of a wind going into the break. Although it's hard to know how much that 4-week break difference will make. You lose the luster of coming off a race weekend and then going into another soon after. So maybe this will change their thinking going into it. Then we have Williams now P8 with 10 points. So they, as we mentioned before, they kind of broken that difficult streak. They've now a reasonable handful of points ahead of Alfa Romeo, who are in 9th with 3, and Haas still with 0. It all comes down to whether or not Williams can hold on to it. If Alfa Romeo can find their own chance to do it and grab some points, it's something that they've been capable of doing in the past. So I think we might have a nice little battle there. It would be nice to actually have a little back and forth at the bottom of the grid as well. We'll see if we manage to get that.
Absolutely. Right, that concludes the Hungarian Grand Prix post-race discussion, and what a race weekend it was. Honestly, like Alex said at the start of the episode, after qualifying, we all thought, right, it could be Mercedes 1-2 going into the race. It's going to be a Mercedes-Red Bull fight for the win. Ocon, what a guy. And I'm so glad we've now got a new race winner. It's a different race winner this year as well. Absolutely fantastic. So send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or you can get in touch with us at RacePerMinute.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can comment down below. Like Alex said in the previous segment, one of our videos did very well the other day, got 3,500 views, over 100 comments, and we just love interacting with you guys, but keep it clean. That's what we like to see. If you enjoyed the episode, you can give us a like rating, or a rating, depending on what you're watching or listening on. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing for more wherever you get Race Per Minute, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbeam, or YouTube. If you can click that follow or subscribe button. It really helps the algorithm promote our content without us having to promote our content. That's what we just want. People finding our content who really enjoy it, like-minded people. And if you really want to support the show, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute, where you can help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, which you can all check out again at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. Well, that's it. The first half of the season is done. It's done. We're here.
Or is it? Or is it? Because breaking news, Shane.
Oh no.
Genuinely breaking news. As you were saying these closing comments, seeing here, and this is I've been checking that this is actually legit. But it seems that Sebastian Vettel, because the classification has been ruled as provisional, subject to the outcome of the notice of the appeal lodged by Aston Martin Cognizant F1 team against the steward's decision 59. So for now, Vettel is classified as P2 and gets the points.
All right. Okay.
So everything we just said about the table is slightly different. But anyway, he may or may not get the points, and the points that we've seen coming out of this race may or may not happen. Williams might have 10. They might only have, 6 or something, or 8 or whatever it is. Yeah. So, we don't know what's going on.
It's been a weekend full of drama, and the drama will continue into the summer break, where it's usually quite a relaxing time. But I reckon these 4 weeks will fly by pretty quick. We've got some podcast ideas coming up. We'll keep you guys included up on Twitter, obviously asking for you guys for all your questions and whatnot. But Spa is the next race. It's one of my favourite tracks of the calendar, just because I love it. It's so long. It can be raining in one part of the circuit and bone dry in the other one. I think it's going to be brilliant. Not that I'm hoping for rain.
We should say in advance as well that there'll likely be a bit of a delay in that episode, because it also happens to be the race is happening also when, I don't know about you, Shane, but I just happened to be away at that time. So I'm not going to be. It's going to take me a few days before I can record. So that episode might be a little bit late. We are still going to do it though. We're still going to do the because I think we just have to sit down and talk about it at some point anyway. So we thought we're still going to record the podcast. It just might be a little bit later than usual, but very much look forward to coming back for that. It would also be nice to have a break as well, where we can talk about some other bits. And also, I don't know about you, Shane, but I kind of need a bit of a holiday at some point. It's that time of year, isn't it?
We've done quite well to produce so many episodes so close to the race and get them out Monday or Tuesday. Our annual leave was always going to bite us eventually, and it will do for Spa. But as it stands, that podcast will just be a few days later than usual, and we hope you'll still tune in and let us know what you think.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye bye.